Imagine waking up one day and discovering that everything you had once believed about meaning, purpose, and truth had been dismantled, not replaced, not reinterpreted, but simply erased, like chalk washed away from a blackboard after a rainstorm, leaving behind a hollow silence where once there had been words, promises, and direction. You open your eyes, and the world looks the same. The sun still climbs across the horizon. People still rush toward their obligations. Laughter still echoes in coffee shops, and arguments still rise in the halls of politics, but beneath it all there is a quiet dread, a weight pressing into your chest that whispers, none of this holds. You sense, almost instinctively, that without something higher, something beyond yourself anchoring existence, you are drifting in an ocean without a compass, carried not by choice but by currents, indifferent to whether you live or die. And in that instant, you realize the paradox that gnaws at the heart of modern life. The more we liberate ourselves from God, from transcendence, from the ancient weight of eternity, the more we believe we are cutting chains, when in truth we are stripping away the very ground beneath our feet. Is freedom the removal of boundaries, or is it the discovery of the right boundaries? Is liberation the shedding of old beliefs, or is it the rooting of oneself in something unshakable? You feel the terror of questions without anchors, answers without authority, and truths that dissolve the moment you press against them. What is love when stripped of eternity, when it is nothing but chemistry and fleeting sparks across synapses? What is morality when the universe itself is indifferent, when right and wrong are reduced to preferences with no consequence beyond social consensus? And what becomes of you, your identity, your story, when there is no witness beyond other mortal eyes, no horizon beyond the grave, no permanence beyond the dust you will soon become? Perhaps you tell yourself that this is freedom, that too. Live without God is to live without illusions, to walk with courage into the void. But in the quiet of night, when no one is watching and the laughter has faded, does that freedom not feel more like a cage made of glass, transparent, spacious, yet inescapably confining because it is bordered not by walls you can fight against, but by nothingness itself? Imagine standing in a vast desert where the horizon stretches endlessly, and there are no signposts, no stars, no maps. You can walk in any direction, but each step feels identical, indistinguishable from the last, and the freedom to go anywhere collapses into the despair of going nowhere. The modern age whispers, rejoice, for you are free, no God watches over you, no destiny binds you, no eternal judge measures your life. And yet, what if that same whisper is the lullaby of emptiness, a voice soothing you into forgetting that you are starving, not feasting? We were promised liberation through unbelief. But look closely at the faces of those who were raised on nothing but matter, nothing but chance, nothing but neurons. Ask yourself if their eyes gleam with freedom or flicker with quiet exhaustion. We have killed the gods of old, but in their place have we not enthroned new idols, money, fame, pleasure, controlled, that demand more sacrifice than any temple ever did? We have declared ourselves sovereign over our own meaning, but why then? Do we drown in anxiety, depression, and despair, frantically scrolling, drinking, consuming, numbing, as though terrified to face the silence that greets us when all distractions fall away? Perhaps the great question is not whether we can live without God, but whether we can survive without Him, more frighteningly, whether we already aren't. If God is dead, as Nietzsche proclaimed, then who buried Him, and what buried with Him? Was it not also the possibility of objective truth, of unshakable values, of permanence that endures beyond time. And if those things have vanished, then what remains of love, justice, beauty, hope? Can a flower bloom in the vacuum of space? Can a soul thrive in a cosmos stripped of its source? And what if the terrible irony is that, in our flight from divine authority, we have not escaped chains, but forged heavier ones, chains of self-invention that exhaust us? Chains of endless choice without compass, chains of infinite freedom that taste not of possibility but of despair. Consider the hunger that gnaws beneath every human pursuit, the longing for something more, something greater, something eternal. We chase wealth, but wealth only inflames desire. We chase love, but love falters when stripped of eternity. Chase power, but power crumbles before death. Every hunger hints at a feast. Every thirst implies water. And yet we are told to silence that hunger, to medicate that thirst, to accept that our souls are merely evolutionary illusions gasping for air that doesn't exist. But what if the absence we feel is not evidence of futility, but of exile, that we are homesick for a place we have forgotten, longing for a presence we deny, starving for a God we pretend to have outgrown? The silence, then, is not proof of emptiness, but of distance, not the absence of meaning, but the ache for its return. And so you are left with the unsettling question: is the freedom you prize truly freedom, or is it emptiness masquerading as liberation, a hollow stage where the actor must invent a script that convinces no one, least of all himself? If without God we are free, why then does our freedom feel so much like captivity to despair? If without God we are sovereign, why then does sovereignty taste so bitter, so exhausting, so fragile? Perhaps the chains we feared were never chains at all, but roots, and in severing them we have not risen into the sky, but drifted into nothingness. And now, as you sit with this thought, as the paradox coils tighter in your chest, you cannot help but wonder what hidden forces within our minds and our societies conspired to bring us here. And why does this emptiness feel so eerily familiar, as though it were designed into us from the beginning? Beneath the surface of this emptiness lies a darker truth, one that psychology, philosophy, and history whisper, but we often refuse to hear. We are not simply victims of cosmic indifference, but collaborators in our own despair, architects of a hollow freedom that was always destined to collapse, because the human soul is not built to live without God, and when denied him, it does not soar but sink. Carl Jung once warned that the modern world suffers not from a lack of information, but from a starvation of meaning. That in stripping away the symbols, rituals, and myths that once connected us to transcendence, we have left ourselves defenseless. Before the chaos of our unconscious, the psyche does not forgive neglect. It festers, projecting divine archetypes onto lesser idols, worshipping celebrities, movements, or ideologies with the same fervor once reserved for temples. Freud, though skeptical of God himself, admitted that humans carry within them an insatiable hunger for a father figure, a stabilizing presence beyond themselves. And when that presence is denied, neurosis spreads like wildfire. We think we are rational beings, liberated from superstition, but our behavior betrays us. We seek saviors in politics, gurus in self-help, transcendence in intoxication, permanence in possessions. Each attempt fails, yet the cycle repeats, because the hunger is real and the substitutes are insufficient. Philosophy echoes the same warning. Sartre proclaimed radical freedom, the terrifying burden of inventing oneself without God, but in practice this burden became unbearable, producing not joy but nausea, not vitality but despair, Camus saw life as absurd, yet his solution rivaled. To live as though meaning existed even when it did not was less an answer than a defiant refusal to surrender. Nietzsche, prophet of God's death, foresaw the consequences more clearly than most. The rise of nihilism, the flattening of values, the creation of last men who seek only comfort, security, and distraction, incapable of greatness because greatness requires belief in something beyond oneself. And so here we are, heirs to this philosophical lineage, wandering through malls and social feeds, convinced we are free but quietly enslaved to restlessness, anxiety, and self-invention. Why does this issue exist? Because human beings are not blank slates, but creatures formed with a spiritual architecture, longing for transcendence as lungs long for air. Strip away the scaffolding of God, and we do not become blank but broken, like instruments detuned and left to play false notes. We live in societies that celebrate autonomy, choice, and self-definition. Yet psychologists have discovered that unlimited choice paralyzes rather than liberates, that too much autonomy corrodes well-being, that identity built solely on self collapses under pressure. The hidden problem, then, is not merely intellectual but existential. We are beings who require meaning, but we have convinced ourselves that meaning is a fiction, and so we perform an endless charade, pretending to be satisfied with what our souls quietly reject. This tension between our hunger for God and our denial of Him seeps into every aspect of life. Consider relationships. Without transcendence, love becomes a contract, a fragile balance of needs. Yet deep down we yearn for permanence, for vows that outlast death, for the sacred union of two souls recognized by something greater than themselves. Or morality. Without God, ethics becomes consensus, utilitarian calculus, shifting sands, yet within us burns an instinct for justice, a rage against evil, a sense that certain acts are not merely unpopular but wrong in the deepest possible sense. Or identity. Without God, the self becomes a project without blueprint, a fragile mask curated for approval, collapsing the moment the applause fades. Our society tells us this is progress, that we have evolved beyond myths, that we should be content with science, technology, and choice. But why then are we drowning in epidemics of despair, depression, and addiction? Why then does our wealth and knowledge fail to quiet the gnawing ache in our souls? Jung would say, we have severed ourselves from the archetype of the self, the divine center, and in doing so we wander fragmented, prey to shadows. Nietzsche would say we lack the strength to birth new values, and so we drift in nihilism. Camus would say we live absurdly, without courage to face the void. But perhaps the truth is simpler. The hunger for God is not a weakness, but a design, and in pretending otherwise, we have condemned ourselves to starve in plain sight. This is the hidden root of our emptiness, not merely the absence of God in our minds, but the refusal to admit that without Him, everything collapses: meaning, morality, identity, hope. And the longer we persist in denial, the more we numb ourselves. The more we distract, the more we worship lesser gods that demand more and give less. The tension builds, and with it a haunting question. If this hunger is real, if this root of emptiness is woven into the structure of the soul, then what unseen consequences are already shaping our lives and our world in ways we scarcely recognize? And so the unseen consequences emerge, not with the clarity of thunder, but with the slow suffocation of air thinning in a sealed room. Imperceptible at first, but devastating once noticed, shaping not only our private lives, but the very architecture of our culture, And the irony is that the more fiercely we deny God, the more aggressively his absence corrodes everything we hold dear. Look closer at yourself, the way you scroll endlessly through feeds, chasing fragments of distraction as though each flick of your finger might deliver meaning. The way silence terrifies you because in silence you might hear the echo of the void. The way love feels fragile because without eternity it seems destined to fail. And how every triumph tastes bittersweet because even in the moment of victory you sense it slipping away into nothingness. This is not coincidence. It's the neurological residue of a mind cut off from transcendence. A brain designed to seek coherence, left spiraling in dissonance. Circuits firing in search of patterns, but finding only chaos, and so dopamine floods at every trivial novelty, while deep satisfaction withers. Psychologists call it the hedonic treadmill. Philosophers call it the absurd. Theologians call it estrangement from God. But whatever the label, the experience is the same. A restless dissatisfaction that cannot be silenced because it is not meant to be silenced by consumption, only fulfilled by the infinite. Society too bears the scars. Watch as morality fractures into tribes, each declaring their subjective truths with absolute ferocity, yet none able to appeal to anything higher than preference. And so disagreement escalates not into debate, but into war, because when truth is absent, power becomes the final arbiter. Without God, justice becomes a performance, a shifting code enforced by whoever holds the loudest megaphone, and the ancient sense that wrongs must be accounted for before an eternal judge vanishes, leaving either cynicism or rage. Communities unravel as individuals isolate, each pursuing their self-invented identity. But fragile selves cannot sustain communal bonds, and so loneliness spreads, like a plague, ironically most virulent in the wealthiest, freest societies. Family disintegrates because marriage, once anchored in sacred permanence, becomes a contract of convenience. Children grow in households without roots, inheriting not values but confusion, and so the cycle repeats. And what of politics? In a godless age it becomes religion, with ideologies treated as sacred, opponents cast as demons, policies as commandments, leaders as messianic figures who inevitably betray because no human can bear the weight of divine expectation. Culture, art, even language itself begins to flatten. Once cathedrals reached toward heaven, symphonies wrestled with eternity, poetry bent language toward the ineffable. Now, much of art collapses into irony, spectacle, or provocation, reflecting a civilization unsure of what it believes and thus incapable of producing works that endure. All this unfolds quietly, invisibly, because the consequence of emptiness is not always loud despair but a subtle withering, a slow corrosion of spirit that leaves people functioning outwardly while hollow within. We distract ourselves with entertainment, intoxication, productivity, but beneath it all is the low hum of nihilism, a gnawing suspicion that nothing matters. And the terror is not that we scream in despair, but that we stop screaming altogether, numbed into apathy, the walking dead of a secular age. Cognitive science reveals how deeply ingrained this trap is. Humans are wired for narrative, to situate themselves in a larger story. Yet, in a godless cosmos, the story shrinks to birth and death with nothing beyond, and so the mind rebels, constructing pseudo-stories, career arcs, fitness goals, political causes that never quite satisfy because the ending is always the same: oblivion. Neuroscience shows our brains are wired for ritual and transcendence, but we replace the liturgy of worship with the liturgy of consumption, pilgrimages to malls instead of temples, sacraments of screens instead of sacraments of grace. Each substitution fails, yet we persist, because the hunger cannot be erased, only misdirected. The consequence is subtle despair dressed in modern clothes, anxiety disorders skyrocketing, addiction epidemics spreading, depression becoming the background noise of a generation told. It is freer than ever, but secretly crushed by the weight of constructing meaning ex nihilo. And here lies the cruelest paradox. The very freedom we worship enslaves us, because without God, every choice becomes ultimate, every identity provisional, every failure catastrophic. For there is no higher mercy to redeem mistakes, no eternal frame to hold our small stories. You become trapped in the tyranny of the self, condemned to invent and reinvent endlessly, while deep inside your soul whispers for rest, for roots, for something beyond yourself. This is the unseen consequence, that in fleeing God we have not liberated ourselves, but condemned ourselves to a fragile, exhausting performance, a theater of autonomy that collapses as soon as the curtain falls. And yet, Tand, this is the haunting invitation, the very ache you feel, the emptiness you try to silence, the hunger that drives your restless pursuits, may itself be the signpost pointing home, the echo of the God you deny but cannot escape. For, if without God we are empty, perhaps the emptiness itself is the doorway, the evidence that your soul is not broken but simply yearning for what it was always made